It's Saturday afternoon football between the Cleveland Browns and Baltimore Ravens to round out the regular season. We talk about the biggest storylines, key matchups, and so much more in a crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into an edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns for a crossover style episode. Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens alongside Spencer German of Locked On Browns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. Also in audio form, where you can follow along and subscribe as well for 5 days a week of Ravens and Browns content. Today's crossover Thursday of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Spencer, it's been a while since the Ravens have played on a Sunday, and that's not going to change this weekend, as the NFL has decided that the Ravens and Browns are going to face off on Saturday afternoon. I know these are two teams going in different directions right now. The Ravens obviously playing to win the AFC North. The Browns maybe playing for draft position, if you believe in that sort of thing. But still, these are professional football players, and this is an AFC North game, which can get pretty unpredictable.
Yeah, I kind of talked about that a little bit this week because, I don't know that teams like actively tank in terms of like the way that fans kind of envision it, where it's like, oh, they're calling bad plays on purpose. And, they're like Jerry Jeudy had like 4 drops last week. Like, oh, Jerry Judy's dropping the ball because he's in on the tank. Like, I don't think that's happening. But I do think the Browns are kind of leaning into the idea of, hey, let's not give ourselves necessarily the best chance to win by playing DTR quarterback. And that's likely going to be the case again this week, maybe with some Bailey Zappi mixed in as well. But to your point, there always is kind of that unknown factor of, hey, these players, they don't go out with the intention of losing on purpose. They're getting paid to do this, and they take a lot of pride in what they do. So yeah, they could always, shock people and pull off. I mean, look what the Giants did last week, right? Like that's the perfect example. Everybody thought the Giants were shooing to get the number 1 overall pick, and then they kind of gave it away because Drew Lock decided to have the game of his life and just absolutely torch the Colts. So yeah, you just never know. There's always the unknown of that, and I know despite the fact that the Browns have obviously had a terrible season, they're going to go out, they're going to try to play hard. It's a division game, and I would imagine they'd like to finish the season strong. And there's some underlying stories here too. Rodney McLeod's last game as a pro, like he really wants to get a win. There's some others who certainly feel like, this could be their last game. Joe Bitonio could retire this offseason. So there's some extra sort of underlying motivations for this Browns team as well.
Yeah, if you're saying players go out there and forcefully, like against their will, say, oh, we're going to have to perform badly. These guys are playing for contracts. Yeah. They're playing for their own personal goals. You can't tell a guy to go out there and just tank. No. Now, like you said, I agree. Teams can make personnel decisions that might not reflect winning and hold guys out that might give them a better chance of getting the draft pick. Because again, what's a week 18 win going to do for Cleveland when it comes to draft position, like you said with the Giants? But these guys, they're going to play hard. They're going to play to win. And the Ravens have to be prepared for that, because the last time these two teams played with Jameis Winston at the helm, everybody thought, oh, this is going to be a shoo-in for the Ravens. Jameis Winston, it's going to be fine. And obviously, Jameis Winston and that Cleveland Browns team took down the Baltimore Ravens. Well, let's start with the Browns, Spencer, on the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned the quarterback situation, DTR, Bailey Zappi. It's an interesting dynamic because especially with the Browns having dealt with so many injuries and just a pretty poor season overall, is the quarterback situation the biggest storyline right now, or are there other things that you might have your eye on with this?
Yeah, I mean, from a fan perspective, like unless you're talking about what we just kind of alluded to with the tanking thing and trying to get a top pick, I do think the quarterback situation is probably one of the bigger stories with this team. Just because, nobody knows what this room's going to look like next year. I think what happened last week was the Browns restructured Deshaun Watson's contract, which allows them to, move some money around and kind of create some flexibility this offseason to do some things and probably stay competitive. And that move also basically guarantees that he is back on this roster next year. But that was pretty much a guarantee anyway. because the dead cap hit that they'd have to take on if they cut him or release him or whatever is just way too big. So other than that, though, like there are a lot of questions about what does this room look like around Deshaun Watson with him sort of part of it. You know, is Jameis Winston back in the fold next year for the Browns? Is DTR back in the fold next year for the Browns? So I do think people are kind of watching these games and watching DTR play and maybe even watching Bailey Zappi play in this game with you know, some criticalness of, okay, is this somebody who is going to be back in this QB room or part of the depth chart next year? I'm kind of under the impression, like I felt like even when they first announced they were starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson, that they already kind of knew what they had in Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So I'm not necessarily thinking you're going to learn anything new about him. And so I honestly wonder, like, if this is maybe the last game that somebody like DTR is playing for the Browns, because if they're going into this offseason, like, we want to draft a rookie, we want to sign a veteran, whether it's Kirk Cousins or somebody else, or maybe they bring back Jameis Winston. Like, I think there's a good chance this quarterback room looks completely different other than Deshaun Watson next year. So I do think that's something people are keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and obviously that will have ripple effects throughout the whole AFC North and how the division looks, because whether it's Deshaun Watson, a quarterback they bring in, or something along those lines, I mean, that's the most important position on your football team. And obviously for Cleveland, they had a vision for Deshaun Watson when he first came in, and they gave up all those assets and gave up all that money to get him. Clearly it has not worked out that way. So now you kind of got to reevaluate and see what your room looks like and how you want to build that out with him still in the fold in some way, shape, or form, regardless of what that is. Now, defensively for Cleveland, Spencer, I know the big story is obviously stopping Lamar Jackson in this game. Can they do that? I mean, they did it enough in the first game to pull out a victory. Players like Myles Garrett. Now, I guess the defense looked a little different the first time around with Zadarius Smith still in a Browns uniform. He's now in Detroit, and a couple of other players who have been in and out of the lineup since then. But do you feel like Cleveland has another good shot at stopping Lamar Jackson, or do you feel like this might be a game where it's just week 18 and the Browns are beat up and the offseason's right there and it might just be too tall of a task?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is I feel like especially early in his career, Lamar owned the Browns. Like, Kevin Stefanski didn't really have a good record against him. In the same way that the Browns seemed to really be in Joe Burrow's head, it seemed like Lamar was in the Browns' head. But I think the last couple times they've played, going back to that the you know, infamous game last November, the one that Deshaun Watson got hurt in the first time last year, where he had the great comeback in the second half. Like that was a game where Lamar kind of got a little like loose with the ball, and it led to and sparked the Browns comeback. And then when they played earlier this season, same sort of thing. Like I think they kind of got like shell shocked a little bit by the fact that the Browns were playing so tough and they didn't see it coming, and Lamar made some mistakes in that game, and it allowed the Browns to obviously pull out the win. Yeah, like I don't think this time around the Ravens are going to take the Browns as lightly. I wonder if there was a little bit of that kind of in play earlier this season. And especially knowing what's at stake for them, the division's on the line. They have a chance to sort of lock that up before the Steelers even play. You know, like that stuff all plays into it. So listen, I think this defense, last year they were historically great. They've taken a little bit of a step back this year, but when you talk about how bad the Browns have been this year, I don't necessarily start with that side of the ball, because I still think they've been a pretty good unit. And I think they generally have played pretty well against Lamar Jackson, like I said, more recently. So I think they'll have some answers for things. I think they'll be able to slow him down a little bit, but I also think he's playing at another MVP level, another MVP caliber season. And the biggest thing, like I said, with the Browns is because their offense doesn't give you much, there's a lot of 3 and outs, a lot of short drives, getting the ball back to the opponent. And I think that's the thing that's going to ultimately do this Browns team in, because even if the defense gets a few stops, I just don't see them putting up the points to keep pace with Lamar Jackson and this Ravens team that is obviously playing absolutely incredible right now and just really balling out. I mean, I think the way they played against the Steelers last week was a testament to that, because usually when those two teams play, it's really like slog of a game, and they were firing on all cylinders. So that speaks to the level that he's playing at right now and the level that the Ravens offense is playing at right now.
Yeah, they've certainly hit their stride. There's some inconsistency sometimes, but regardless, throughout the entire course of the season, the offense has been pretty historic for the Ravens this season. Injury-wise for the Browns, Spencer, there were a couple of players in that first game. Obviously, that was kind of like Cedric Tillman, and that was the Ravens fans' introduction to Cedric Tillman. He obviously has not played really ever since then, and now he's on IR. So that's over. David Njoku missed practice on Wednesday, I saw. So obviously Jerry Jeudy has taken off. I mean, Jerry Judy's been the guy in Cleveland. But the Browns injury situation, can you kind of take us through that right now and how the Browns are looking in that regard for Saturday?
Yeah, so there was a number of guys who were missing from practice today, including, the guys you mentioned. Obviously, Cedric Tillman was missing, but that's largely because he got placed on the IR. But also missing were Denzel Ward didn't practice today. Myles Garrett didn't practice today. Those could just kind of be veteran days off. I know Denzel is dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury, so he's trying to get back out there. Myles will likely practice on Thursday, and that'll sort of be a sign that he's still going to play. For Myles, I think there's a little added motivation because he has a chance to finish as the season sack leader, and he's never done that in his career, so I think he definitely wants to play. David Njoku, as you mentioned, is another one that probably is in line to not play this week just because he's dealing with another injury, and he's had an injury-riddled season altogether. And then Jerome Ford is one to keep an eye on because he's dealing with an ankle injury. Wasn't out there today, but he wasn't in a walking boot or anything after the injury that he sustained on Sunday. So I'm kind of curious to see if he's able to go and he's out there playing for the Browns. He's had a pretty good season. I think he's shown in some spurts I don't know that they view him as like the long-term number one, but he has been a solid option for them in the absence of Nick Chubb. So I think that changes the dynamics on offense if you don't have him out there, because like you said, then it really does become pretty much just Jerry Jeudy, who can do some things in terms of causing some problems for a defense. But as you saw last week, just having Jerry Jeudy out there is not enough for this Browns offense to do much of anything.
Yeah, especially because the first time these two teams played, the Ravens defense was not nearly playing to the level they have over the past month and a half. And that's a big storyline as well. So coming up, we'll be flipping the field, talking about the Ravens side of things, offensively, defensively. Stay tuned. We have a lot to get to on this crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. I mean, I've gone to a bunch of concerts. I'm a big concert guy. The energy and excitement, they're unforgettable. And now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And recently, I mean, look, the Ravens and the Browns, that game is going to be at M&T Bank Stadium in Week 18. And if you're looking for tickets for that game, you should use the Gametime app, because with Gametime Picks, you can find amazing deals, and you can even see the views from your seats before buying, which is something that I love about Gametime. And the super deals, they're particularly impressive. They offer great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Back here on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. Kevin Oestreicher, Spencer German, still talking with you about a Week 18 battle between the Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns, set to face off. Not Sunday. Don't turn your TVs on Sunday at 1 o'clock expecting this game. It is Saturday at 4:30. Spencer, we talked about the Browns in the first part of the show. We're going to flip over to Baltimore here. Obviously, in Baltimore, the MVP conversation has certainly been taking a hold on everybody. Lamar Jackson is having his best season to date, and we were kind of wondering here when we would see that, because last year he had his best season, and here he is. He had his body transformation. He's on pace. He already broke Michael Vick's single season or all-time career rushing record. He's broken multiple single season records as well. But obviously, Josh Allen's having an incredible season too. We've actually started to hear some potential votes come in from voters. Dan Orlovsky clearly on the Josh Allen train. You have Mina Kimes, a couple of others on Lamar Jackson. This is not like a unanimous race Lamar has had the previous two times. This is going to be close. Lamar and Josh Allen are both incredible players. And when you talk about this offense, Derrick Henry's been a great addition. He's someone that has elevated Lamar, and Lamar has elevated him. It's a two-way street there. I think Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman have both had incredible years. Bateman, there were a lot of question marks with him. And he's someone, obviously had the big drop in the first Cleveland game that kind of went off his face, but he has really come on and done really good things. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely at the tight end room. Lamar is the engine for this team. He's the guy that makes this whole thing work. I know there have been conversations about, if Lamar was off the Ravens, they would win 8 to 9 games with Derrick Henry. I don't know if people have watched this team with Tyler Huntley or Josh Johnson, but that's just not the case. It just feels like Lamar is a guy that has been breaking barriers ever since he came in the league, and this has been another year of that, which is why I think the MVP race is so polarizing, particularly here in Baltimore.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I guess not funny. It is like a prominent storyline, obviously, right now. But I was kind of saying last week, given how Joe Burrow has played, I'm surprised that he hasn't gotten like more run in this conversation. Obviously, leading the league in passing yards, leading the league in passing touchdowns. He's been incredible. And I guess like the kicker for him is he's been on a below 500 team for most of the season. So for him, it almost comes down to this game this weekend. Like if they beat the Steelers and then get the help they need on Sunday and you sneak into the playoffs as the 7 seed, maybe that's when the Joe Burrow thing becomes a little bit more prominent. But, it's for the Browns to know that you have 2 players in this division that are like always in that conversation or should be in that conversation, obviously makes for a daunting task. It's probably part of the reason why they went and traded for Deshaun Watson in the first place, because they knew that they needed a quarterback to kind of keep up with the Joneses here in the division. But yeah, like it's crazy that the MVP conversation's gotten here. And obviously Lamar won it last year with, I think fine numbers, but they weren't like what they are this year. And I kind of said coming into the season, I thought like year 2 in Todd Monken's offense was going to be a real, was going to be what made the Ravens such a threat to win the Super Bowl, because now he understands things a little bit more. It's a little bit slower for him, and he's got Derrick Henry thrown in the mix as well. So, I mean, they almost feel unbeatable when they're kind of rolling on those cylinders the way they've been lately.
Right, and I hear on the Joe Burrow thing, and look, Ravens fans have seen that up close and personal twice when Joe Burrow put up 80 million points on the Ravens in both matchups. It just felt like he could not be stopped. But I feel like it's such an interesting conversation because it feels like for everybody, there's a certain cutoff of like what seed or what record you have to be in that conversation. So for me, it's like if the Ravens were the 5 seed, which they were up until last week when they took back the North,
right?
That's a lot louder for Allen. I'm like, okay, you can make an argument that like being the 5 seed and Allen being the 2 seed with everything. Like, yeah, that's probably Josh Allen's award. The 3 seed versus the 2 seed, and then 2 losses with Lamar leading in all the categories. And it's also, I think, funny, Spencer, how the conversation changes every year about what the award actually is and kind of what constitutes what is important in the award. But then you have stuff like strength of schedule, which, the Ravens have played. They've played every playoff team this season. They've lost to just one of them in the Kansas City Chiefs. So other than that, but I agree. If Joe Burrow gets the 7 seed, that conversation will become a lot louder. It will become a lot louder.
Well, and that's interesting too. Like you bring up the different parameters for different people thing, because, like some people feel like if it's just about like, is that person the most valuable to their team? And like, I think that kind of comes into play with Burrow most of all, even though he obviously statistically is having a great season too. But like, if they sneak into the playoffs, what would that team wouldn't have a chance of making the playoffs if it wasn't for Burrow. So, like you can kind of look at, and I think the same thing kind of applies to Josh Allen, where it's like the Bills were supposed to take a step back this year, but Josh Allen's like raised his game to a whole nother level. But again, like with Lamar, like everything kind of works because Lamar is there. So I don't know. It's a fun debate. I honestly like, this is a year where I think if any of those 3 guys were to win it, I don't really have a lot to gripe about. I used to be on the Bills beat, so I see a lot of like the Bills fan reaction to the MVP conversation. It's a lot of people who just really want to see Josh Allen finally get some respect. So they're like, they're going to be devastated if he doesn't win it. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see how that eventually plays out, and if the Bengals do sneak into the playoffs, if that gives Joe Burrow maybe some sort of boost and maybe get into the mix on the conversation. But yeah, I'm curious from your perspective. Obviously, Lamar's been awesome. But just on the flip side of things defensively, I want your perspective on like what's changed with the passing defense, because that was a unit earlier in the season, and we saw it in Cleveland that was, susceptible to giving up a lot of big plays and really wasn't playing that well. But it feels like the last few weeks they've really shored things up. What has changed for that group really over the last like 5 or 6 weeks or so?
It's been a nice linear process for them because it started after that Cincinnati Thursday night win, which they squeaked out, but the defense really, there were miscommunications, bad play calls, everything you can imagine, penalties.
Yeah.
They had a closed door meeting, open forum. Anybody could speak, anybody could air their grievances, share their thoughts, and it was a lot of hard conversations, productive conversations, but hard conversations. And essentially, Marlon Humphrey shared that the message in that meeting, or at least one of them, was that if you want to play, you want to go out there, you want to be a part of this, you're going to have a spot. If you don't, you're going to see the bench. And that's essentially what has happened. They cut Eddie Jackson, who was terrible for them in the first place, and especially in that Cleveland game the first time around. That was one of the worst games I've ever seen by any individual defender. He's now off the team. Marcus Williams, who was their $70 million man, they've benched him. He's a healthy scratch now, which is tough because you pay all that money. Some teams would just say, hey, we're paying this guy a lot of money. It's a sunken cost fallacy. We have to play the guy because we invested the money. The Ravens have not done that. They've inserted Ardarius Washington into his spot, who has been incredible, multiple big-time splash plays seemingly every week now. But the big thing is they've moved Powell Hamilton back to more of a traditional safety role where obviously he can play at all three levels of the defense. The Ravens love to use him as a blitzer up at the line. But him being back there, Roquan Smith has said that has simplified his duties because Roquan was making calls to all three levels. He had to be accountable for everybody. But now that Hamilton is back there being another communicator, it has lessened the load off of Roquan Smith's plate. And Roquan struggled a bit at the beginning of the season too. So I think that has helped. You have other guys stepping up. For example, they also benched Trenton Simpson, who was supposed to be this great second-year player for them. Once Patrick Queen left for Pittsburgh, didn't really work out that way. So they said, okay, we have to make a change. In comes Malik Harrison, an Ohio State guy. In comes Chris Board, a special teams guy, and they have been playing pretty well as a platoon group. So it's interesting because they had the pass offense, they had the rush offense, they had the rush defense. All of those were great. It was just if they could finally find a way to get that pass defense up to snuff. I mean, this team is competitive with anybody and they can beat anybody. And now that they have kind of put that last infinity stone in the gauntlet, it feels like they're hitting on all cylinders and peaking at the right time, which has led to a lot of big wins, led to them retaking the AFC North, and obviously come a couple days from now, hopefully lead to a deep playoff run.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned like having the meeting and benching guys and not, just kind of leaning into the fact that you're paying them, so you have to play them. I honestly feel like that's a luxury for the Ravens because they have a coach who they sort of rely on and they trust, who's been in the organization for so long that he can do stuff like that. That's not to say like younger coaches or new coaches don't have some of that same leeway, but you sometimes see with certain organizations, like there's just not the trust level there yet, or, owners want to meddle or whatever it might be. So yeah, like the idea that you have a coach there that is obviously established who he is and, has this great history of being as effective as he is. And he sort of gets away with that a little bit more than maybe other people do. So, it's a nice luxury and a nice thing for the Ravens to have in a coach that has obviously established himself. And I think Mike Tomlin's kind of a similar ilk within this division. Like those two guys are the longest tenured coaches in the league, and they are able to, get away with a little bit more when it comes to those tactics. And they are trusted to do more than I think some of the other coaches are.
Yeah, and that's some of the trust that you can have with John Harbaugh. And look, no coach is perfect. John Harbaugh is certainly not. And there are certainly flaws, and we've seen those flaws pop up seemingly every season.
It's crazy to think, like, we're not, like, that far removed. Like, what, 4 years or so removed from, like, people talking about John Harbaugh maybe being on the hot seat. It's all come, like, full circle where he's, they really leaned into Lamar, and they've his career's obviously been phenomenal ever since. And it's wild that that was even a conversation when you kind of look back on it,
Yeah, that was 2018 Lamar,
Okay, so yeah, like 6 years ago.
Yeah, Flacco got up to a 4-5 start. He got injured. There were conversations that he was going to get fired or they were going to trade him. And Lamar essentially came in there, went 5-1 or 6-1 as a starter, as a rookie, won them the division, and that bought John Harbaugh time. And here we are, 2025, crazy enough, and John Harbaugh still a member of the Baltimore Ravens as their head coach. And again, this game means a lot for Baltimore in terms of winning their division. And coming up, we'll talk about how they can get the job done, but also how Cleveland could maybe play spoiler in this game. So we have a lot to dive into on this crossover edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. Don't go anywhere. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So FanDuel, they have so many ways for you to pick up a W, betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. And if you want to take a look at this Ravens and Browns Week 18 matchup, I mean, you have the Ravens as 17.5-point favorites over on FanDuel. So if you like the Ravens being the big home favorite, or if you like the Browns being the big road underdog, be sure to pick your side over on FanDuel. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns, Kevin Oestreicher, Spencer German, rounding out your crossover Thursday edition of the show. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button in video form and follow along in audio form on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns for that 5 days a week Ravens and Browns coverage. Spencer, prediction-wise, let's get into some keys to victory for these two teams. The Browns are coming to Baltimore, so we'll start with you. What are 3 keys that you feel like the Browns have to do and have to take advantage of in order to play spoiler here against Baltimore?
Yeah, I think the obvious is contain Lamar Jackson to an extent, limit the damage. He's gonna make some plays. He always does, especially in these division games. You know, the stakes are higher and all these and whatnot. So he's gonna get you a few times, but if you can limit those shots, or you can limit the damage from him, I think that goes a long way. And the Browns have done that before. But you got to sort of force them into some mistakes and be able to just kind of rally from those things. I think that's probably number 1. Number 2 has to be just whoever's playing quarterback. They got to find a way to get this offense in gear. I mean, it's been 2 weeks of some of the worst offensive football I've probably watched in my career. So they whether it's DTR and I don't mean that as I'm not trying to take shots here like DTR or whatever, but it's just the offense just has not flowed and they just can't get into rhythm. They've gotten up to slow starts. They have like a drive here or there sprinkled in where they go down and score. And it's like, okay, they did something. And then the next drive is almost like a 3 and out again. It's just this kind of stop and start type of offense. And for whatever reason, they can't get it going. So they got to be able to move the ball up and down the field and score and put up points, because against a Ravens team like this, you fall behind early. It's probably game over. It takes a lot to sort of keep pace. So that has to be the big thing. And I guess I'll stay on the offensive side and just say, you got to put the ball in Jerry Jeudy's hands. That's going to be your primary weapon. They targeted him 18 times last week. They were able to do some nice things when the ball was in his hands, and it was a far cry from the week before where he only got 3 targets. But without David Njoku likely going to miss this game, I'm sort of guessing. Cedric Tillman obviously done for the season, and potentially no Jerome Ford as a running back for you. I think you just got to be able to rely on the number 1 weapon that you have and take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I think on the Ravens side of things, number 1 is just don't overthink or honestly underthink this game where, these are professional football players. One of the big things with the Ravens, and Spencer, this isn't even just this year thing or playing against the Browns back in October. This has been multiple seasons of the Ravens sometimes just play down to their opponents, whether it's they don't get up for the game, they don't take them seriously. I mean, Gardner Minshew has become the new Ravens dominator because he beat them as a member of the Colts last year, as the Raiders this year. And obviously that Raiders team is terrible. The Colts team last year was a team you shouldn't have lost to, but that's just the nature of the NFL. It's any given Sunday, or I guess Saturday in this case, but any given week, a team can go in there and beat you regardless of the record, regardless of the talent difference. So Baltimore has to get up for this game. They know what's on the line. This is a hat and t-shirt game, and those always kind of mean something extra, especially when it comes down to the final week of the season like this. Number 2, I would probably say you have to convert better on 3rd down, even in the red zone. 4th down. The Ravens did not convert well in their first matchup with the Browns. They went 2 of 10 on 3rd down, 0 for 2 on 4th down. They just were not very efficient in situations like that obviously either gave the Browns the ball back off of 4th down turnovers or limited their opportunities to go down the field and score in a game where Cleveland's offense, obviously Jameis was on a heater towards the end of that game and just dominated the defense because the defense was dropped 8 million interceptions. But the offense, this is a unit that can be a really good, consistent week-to-week offense, but sometimes there are those lulls where they can start really fast and then they'll maybe fall off a cliff towards the end of the game, or they'll start slow, then they'll pick it up. I think if the Ravens are more consistent, and that starts with converting on third downs and converting in your opportunities, that will help. And then finally, I would just say the penalties. I say it every week because the Ravens have been the most penalized team in the league this season. They've been a little better as of late, but not necessarily that much better. The Ravens had 7 penalties in the game against Cleveland when they first matched up. Cleveland also had 7, so it wasn't too big of a discrepancy. Regardless, you can't put yourself behind the 8 ball here, especially if you get an 8-yard run from Derrick Henry on first down. Oh, there's holding. All of a sudden, from 2nd and 2, it becomes 1st and 20, and that can derail drives. And the Ravens have had games like that where they've lost because of those types of things. So it's going to be an interesting game. I mean, obviously, Baltimore has a lot at stake. Cleveland doesn't have nearly as much, but you talked about it, Spencer, where guys are playing for pride, guys are playing for milestones, records, or just themselves, and that's going to be a really big key when it comes to how this game ends up playing out.
Yeah, I like that I like that you bring up like third down offense for the Ravens, because I sort of went bigger picture with just the Browns being able to generate some momentum on offense, and part of that for me is what you alluded to. Like, they got to stay ahead of the stick somehow against this Ravens team. And that's been one of the biggest problems, is you're getting DTR back there and like 2nd and long, 3rd and long, and then he's got to throw the football, and that's just not going to be like a winning strategy for the Browns. And you bring up the penalties, like that's been an issue for the Browns all year, and it's been a mystery as to why they haven't been able to correct some of these things. Like, penalties are going to happen, and I think sometimes there's, I don't want to say a misconception, but there's always this belief that like the most penalized teams are usually bad teams, and that's been true with the Browns this year. But there also are a lot of teams that are at the top of like the most penalized that are also playoff teams and some of the best teams in football. The Ravens are up there, and obviously they're going to the playoffs and have a chance to win the division. So I don't necessarily, but it's the type of penalty. And I think it's the fact that like the Browns commit a lot of like illegal procedures and they don't line up correctly. Like, those are things that at this point in the year should be corrected. And if you don't have those, if you're doing those things, if you're shooting yourself in the foot, then yeah, you got no chance in a game against the Ravens, who are obviously a really well-coached team and make you pay for those things usually. So yeah, we'll see what it looks like. Major spread on this one in Vegas. I think it was like 17.5 last I saw. But we'll see how ready the Browns are to come out and try to play spoiler a little bit and end the season with a win.
Yeah, 17.5 over on FanDuel. Crazy. And this is the second time in 4 weeks this has happened. The Ravens and the Giants, they were at a crazy number too. So going to be an interesting one for sure. AFC North football to round out the 2024 regular season. But that's all we have for you today on this episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. Again, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button on the way out on YouTube. Also follow along and subscribe in audio form for 5 days a week of Ravens and Browns coverage. For Spencer German, I am Kevin Oestreicher, and we'll see you right back here to round out the week tomorrow on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns.